Thank you both, Nick, Jess, for coming through the torrential rain. A taster, perhaps, of what a December election is like.
Yeah, I don't mind the cold, the rain. I wouldn't be that keen on. You couldn't door knock in this weather, could you?
I just remember elections are meant to be in April. I mean, the election's meant to be in May, and the campaigning is meant to be in April. And you come back with this impossible town, and everybody says, "Where on earth have you been?" And then you say Lincolnshire, and they're rather amazed.
You'd be pretty safe of that in a December election.
Yes, I don't know that you'd be getting much of a town. Maybe one of those skiing ones that people come back
Remember,
with.
the clocks are going back this weekend, so basically you'll be, 4 p.m. it will be dark, which is your peak canvassing time. People don't open their doors when it's dark.
Practical obstacles have been raised by people over the years. Don't go near a December election. But these aren't normal times, and they're not necessarily normal people whispering in Boris Johnson's ear.
Yeah.
What do you think of the chances, Jess?
I'll probably think something different when I wake up tomorrow morning, but I don't think that there's going to be an election. I don't see how he gets his election, because if he puts in the idea, so the 2/3 majority I think is a nil point on that.
Because Labour MPs
won't
back it even if Jeremy Corbyn asks them to.
No, I don't think that they will.
How many of them are willing to dissent, do you think? Enough?
Well, it's always difficult to say, but I'd say enough. And I don't think that
it's got to be a lot.
I don't think Jeremy Corbyn will get to that point, because what has happened previously when this has been raised is that he doesn't back it because we tell him previously that we won't.
Don't you dare.
We won't support it. I don't think it solves anything to have an election.
No, it certainly doesn't solve anything.
Well, we'll come back to that, but just on the practicalities of whether we think he's going to try to press the button and might succeed.
Other routes. One is
bill.
laughable, which is the one-line bill to effectively set aside the Fixed Term Parliament Act, because of course it has to then do what bills have to do, as the government's discovering, which is go through committee, go through report, go to the House of Lords, and I tell you, it will come back looking like the most extraordinary Christmas tree you've ever seen. It will have votes at 16 on it, it will have votes for EU citizens, it'll probably have proportional representation if we put our minds to it.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're going to go down that route.
The other plan is the vote of no confidence
in himself.
The SNP say they're willing to put down the motion.
That's the key. I think that's the only one I think that could work, is where he says that he will provide government time to an SNP motion, because the SNP, unlike the official opposition, doesn't have the right to call a vote of confidence whenever it wants.
Yes.
But he could say, I'll give you the time. They put down a vote of no confidence, and then he whips Conservative MPs to abstain, so that with SNP and Lib Dems all voting no confidence, Labour MPs aren't going to vote confidence in the Conservative government. I mean, that's just a bridge too far.
So you then under that approach, have 2 weeks during which another government can be formed, has to be allowed, time set aside.
14 days.
So he then crashes into the Christmas period, the second half of December.
From 7 weeks on from the first vote of no confidence would be when the election would happen. And there is this risk, okay, not huge, but equally not nothing, that faced with that prospect of that election, having failed to get Brexit done in any way, that Parliament might decide that actually it would prefer not to have an election, but to put in a temporary government to do just that, just to resolve the Brexit question, and then to have an election in the spring. And so you're Boris Johnson, you're sitting there in your comfy armchair that you've been trying to get to for 30, 40 years in number 10 Downing Street. You've got to be pretty bold.
Certain, yeah.
That, that not only that you're going to win the election at the end of it, but that you're not going to find that the cup is dashed from your hand just as you're about to drink from it.
Dominic Cummings is telling people he's got a cunning plan which will get Boris Johnson through all these loopholes and allow him to have the election at the date that he wants.
So far, not so good though, has it? They've not managed to do any of the things they set out to do so far.
And the physical similarity with Baldrick is now being replaced by a similarity in success rate on the cunning plans. That actually there was the cunning plan to prorogue us, the cunning plan to block the Ben Act and refuse to ask the extension.
And then the early election.
To send 2 letters, all of those cunning plans. So let's see whether this cunning plan is any better than the others.
You know Boris Johnson of old, Nick. You were at City Hall helping him out when he was mayor. It's said that he is in a bit of a quandary over all of this, and he has Dominic Cummings, who he hired for strategy, in one ear, and quite a few other people in that ear, telling him you've got to press the button now. And he just isn't quite ready to do it. Is that the man you know, and does the man you know come down on the side of the bold strategy, or what do you think?
I feel like every time I'm interviewed that I have to fess up to dodgy acquaintances in my past.
I know, well, it's all right, we're all here to get you through it.
You were Michael Gove's best man. Oh well, I was under duress, you know. Somebody had drugged me. So on this, I think I have to be honest, which is to admit that Boris Johnson has shown himself since he became Prime Minister to be more decisive and more of a risk taker than I would have advised you was likely based on my experience of him, and indeed based on his career really to date. And you know, he has done some quite bold things. Some of them I think, you know, very, very bad and damaging. Some of them unsuccessful. But let's face it, an important one, the most important one, has come off. He faced down the EU, who said that they weren't going to reopen the withdrawal agreement, and they duly reopened it and gave him another deal that he feels he can sell. So I wouldn't want to say that he is definitely not the sort of man to roll the dice, which is what this is, and go for an election before Brexit has been complete. But I'm pretty confident that he's very, very tall, that there will be lots of voices, not just external to him, but voices inside his own head and heart. You know, I think he will be genuinely torn over it, and I'm sure that one of the reasons why it's taking so long, I mean, they keep on saying it's because of the EU extension. I don't really buy that. The fact is he can't make up his mind as to which is more likely to give him a good majority, you know, and he hears all of the arguments that we make about the weather and Christmas and all of that. He wonders whether he wouldn't be better off standing triumphant as the man who delivered Brexit, you know, who led the campaign, who won the referendum and then delivered the deal. Or is he better saying, you'll only get Brexit if you vote for me because this bunch of Remainer Parliament will keep on blocking me. And it's impossible to know. I mean, you can do lots of polls asking people hypothetical questions, but any pollster will tell you hypothetical questions are, you know, notoriously difficult to poll.
Which one of the options worries you more as a Labour MP, Jess? If he were to go early and roll the dice, the argument is he can fuse the vote that he's got with Leave with maybe some other issues with money he's going to spray around after a general election victory, and basically get a bigger, net a bigger bunch of voters than he'll get if he does it later.
Yeah, I think Nick is exactly right that he's trying to decide which gives him the most. I think a Brexit election, I think he's sort of seen off the Brexit party now, hasn't he? It does feel like they've dissipated. So he wants a Brexit, essentially a referendum, but via the means of a general election. He wants that. And that worries me much, much more than the option of him as a member of the Labour Party, as the option of him, he's delivered Brexit, and then we fight on just actually the national interest terrain, which is far more comfortable for everybody actually to move on from this. But I don't think it solves the problem, the general election. I think that as a Labour MP, I'm worried about either outcome, and for me, the only way that I can see a way that we're going to get an actual general election, which I think, to be fair, has to come soon. I don't think anyone would deny that.
Is March probably the end date in your mind?
Yeah, March. I mean, I would prefer it if it were in April and May, just solely on weather terms. Just, you know, it's really grim for activists if it's cold, although not impossible.
But March is fine.
But yeah, March would be fine. But I think that unless something, whether that's a referendum or a Brexit deal, unless Brexit is settled, I just think a general election does nothing and is just a sort of faux emperor's clothes for whoever gets to be the largest party. And I still don't think that there is a clear majority actually for any particular party. But it gets to be an emperor's clothes where they say, oh, actually, you all said exactly what I wanted to say and now I'm going to do this regardless.
I have a different concern, which is that I did vote for the deal last week. Was it last week? Earlier this week. As I told my constituents I would, as I voted for all three of Theresa May's deal. But there's no question that the deal that Boris Johnson has done is done with the intention of a much harder Brexit for Great Britain, at least, if not Northern Ireland, than was intended by Theresa May. Now, that will not ultimately be decided until the next stage of negotiation of the future relationship. But it's clear from the changes he's made to the withdrawal agreement, the changes he's made to the political declaration, as it's called, that he wants a much harder Brexit. My view is that we, collectively, in this Parliament, have a much better chance of softening the bill and therefore softening the Brexit future relationship than we would, and I won't be in it, but than the new Parliament would if he goes off and wins a big majority. Because it's not just a question of how big is the majority he might win, but it's also who will have put him there and who will the MPs be. And the MPs who are going to leave the Conservative benches after this election, whenever it comes, will overwhelmingly be people of like mind to me. Amber Rudd, perhaps Philip Hammond, Sam Gyimah's gone to the Lib Dems, sort of moderate, voted Remain, reconciled to Brexit, most of us, but want a very, very soft Brexit. And they're all going to be replaced, and I'm looking quite closely at the candidates being selected in our seats. They're all going to be replaced by hard Brexit, practically Brexit party candidates. And they will insist after the next election on the hardest possible Brexit deal, and that would be thoroughly bad for the country.
So tell me what you think is going to happen next if he doesn't get the election that some around him want. What do you think is going to happen on the bill? Second reading passed this week, and
I would have sworn it was last week, you know.
I
mean, terrible.
And we could be looking at an agreement on a timetable with Labour, which is more generous, but
just sort of 2 weeks rather than 3 days.
Yeah, mid-November, you could get it done.
Totally fine, yeah.
I mean, it's slightly annoying, of course, that these days, yesterday, we did nothing. Today, we're doing nothing.
Next week's
Tomorrow,
business.
we're doing nothing. Next week, the whole week.
It's like...
It's just ludicrous.
It's like, you know, saying goodbye to the chaplain for the whole day.
The weird thing is, the people who are actually holding back Brexit right now is the government, is Boris Johnson. We're all gagging to get stuck into this bill. We cleared our diaries to get stuck into this bill.
Stuck in your terms,
it's amending it.
Might mean amending it with wrecking amendments, as the government would see it.
Wrecking is in the eye of the beholder. I think that actually, for the first time, rather than the meaningless votes that we have been having, which is sort of conclusive without very much negotiation, the opportunity of a bill, like any bill in Parliament, is for the improvement of the bill. And whether that is just safeguards about things having to be changed in Parliament rather than in just by way of SI even, or just executive order.
Statutory instrument, but they look as though they're willing to go down a route for some of those things. Those aren't considered wrecking amendments.
But that is what basically any bill going through Parliament should be, and that has the process that we want to happen in the next 2-3 weeks has never happened around this. This is the first. People keep saying, "Oh, we've been talking about it for 3 years." Well, we have. We've been talking about the withdrawal agreement. This is the actual bill, and we, for the first time, we'll get to sit down and say, "Well, we want this amendment. We want that amendment. How many people want it?" Would to improve the bill. Now, obviously, I want to amend it to have it put to the people. There's no two, but Parliament might not vote. For
well, let's
that.
start on that one, which is considered a wrecking amendment by the government. It hasn't got the votes at the moment, has it? The second referendum.
I wouldn't be so certain about that. I've been watching some of my colleagues go around saying it hasn't. It entirely depends on the circumstances of the day. So there is the sort of 200 people who will definitely vote for it, and so put them in your box over here. And then there is 100 who, if this hasn't gone through, will vote for it because actually now this becomes the better option. And that's the thing with a bill, like any bill, it's like a house of cards.
You bumped into the Prime Minister.
I did yesterday.
Voting.
Again, you keep on doing this.
I see him, well, I just hang around the lobbies, what can I say?
And apparently you were shouting at each other, and where they made that up last time.
Totally ridiculous.
Did he look horrified when you suggested a second referendum?
He just looked sort of surprised that I'd suggested it, as if it was brand new information that people might want a referendum. I said, said, what will it do to make you like this bill? And I said, I'm happy as long as you put it to the people. And he said, really? Oh gosh, which was odd. But then we had me and Boris Johnson yesterday had a perfectly reasonable conversation about his concerns about a referendum, my concerns about how whether or not that would be any different to a general election that was fought on Brexit lines. I think they're splitting hairs there, frankly. I think both will be vitriolic, worse than we've ever seen, but nothing that we can't cope with. And he was relatively reasonable about it. He wants people like me to be able to support his bill, and I want him to be able to live with my amendments. It was for the first time, actually, I'd felt like I'd actually had a conversation with him about it. However, it is now them stopping us doing that. I think Parliament, I think he's actually playing this wrong, because I think Parliament is in the mood to progress, and the person stopping that progress now is him.
And his advisors. And the thing is that what would happen is, you're right, of course, there might be some amendments passed either by the Commons in committee or report or by the Lords, which the government would say, if that is not taken out, we are not going to implement this bill, we'll have an election, and we'll then have another go at a much cleaner version of the bill. And we're not fools. Yeah. If, for instance, I'm one of the people who signed Kenneth Clarke's amendment to make a customs union with the European Union one of the negotiating objectives for the future relationship. Now, that is quite likely to be quite a fundamental matter for the government, because there are lots of people, lots of the Brexiters think somehow that being in a customs union is the worst thing ever. Why, I can't understand, but anyway, they do. If it ended up passing and the government said, right, we're either going to pull the bill or you'll take it out, then we'll have a conversation. And if the bill has been improved in other ways sufficiently, you may not persuade many of the backers, but you don't need to persuade many. All you need to do is persuade 5 or 10 people.
Yeah, we're talking about a margin of
10.
To
switch. So that's how a bill ends up in a place that nobody loves, but everybody can live with. And that is the process we were just beginning on. We'd all put down our amendments and got signatures for them and talked to people about, well, do you want to go for that, or is that a bit too hard, and do you want to do it now, or do you want to do it in report? That is the process that any Brexit deal is going to have to go through. But if he comes back next week and says, okay, let's spend 2 weeks, round the clock, no weekend, just go at it, and get it done by, say, the 8th of November or the 14th of November, Parliament will act. And Labour Party will actually insist also that the Lords, who, if Conservatives and Labour peers want to bring business to a conclusion, they can. So the great fear for the government of the last attempt under their programme motion, which was effectively a hostile act to Parliament, was that they have no ability to timetable the House of Lords. If they accept and negotiate with the Labour Party, with the official opposition,
then they do.
a timetable, Labour can help them timetable the Lords, and they can get the whole thing done in a fortnight. We'll be out by the middle of November, either with a referendum attached or free and clear if the referendum doesn't pass.
So you think it's just phony, fake, the number 10 argument that they'd be sucked into a world of pain, a vortex, if you start the parliamentary procedure without a timetabling motion? People will just do all sorts of things to turn Boris Johnson into a new Theresa May, a man who can't get the stuff through.
If we were proposing that they just bring the committee stage started on Monday without a timetable, that would be a very fair prediction. Indeed, that is exactly what would happen, because that's what, the Lords in particular are absolutely sort of past masters of that game, of spinning things out forever. But that's not what we're suggesting. Jeremy Corbyn's chief whip, Nick Brown, Jess's chief whip, has specifically suggested a specific timetable to Mark Spencer, the Conservative chief whip. They've made an offer. They've made it absolutely plain that they are willing to agree. Now, if you have a timetable that is agreed by Her Majesty's opposition and the government, it happens. It's just simple as that. It happens. That timetable is stuck to whatever happens.
So it's Boris Johnson who's holding this up. And I do think that it is phony that they don't want to... But what nobody has ever done, Theresa May didn't do it, and Boris Johnson hasn't done it, has recognised that they don't have a majority. They want to act as if they've got a majority of 150. I don't know why it makes them feel powerful, but they don't have a majority, and so they are going to have to give and take. And so I agree. I don't think that just putting wild wrecking amendments or filibustering it out through Lords committees and things, nobody is suggesting any of that. We are just suggesting that, and what I want might not pass, because do you know what? I recognise I don't have a majority in Parliament, and I want a chance to go at it. I want a chance to go at the things I want, and if I don't get them, then I don't get them.
But that's
okay.
So what it is really is the political debate about election first or election after, because it's not therefore...
How do you build an alliance of voters?
It's how, for him, how do I get the most reliable majority for my Brexit deal?
And do you think, Jess admitted she was more nervous of an early election than a later election. You think Dominic Cummings has probably called it right on that front, in terms of his chances of a majority?
I think they have a very good chance of a majority in either way. I say so. Partly look at the polls, partly look at the relative leader ratings, partly look at the clarity of the message. The clarity of the message for the Conservatives probably has not been as clear for 10 years and won't be as clear ever again. Get Brexit done, that is their message. And it's either get Brexit done or we got Brexit done, but they're both pretty good messages. So I think they have a good chance in either case. All I know is that an election is an utterly unpredictable beast.
Yeah.
And I don't care how certain you are in advance, anything can happen.
Look what happened in 2017.
And why would you, if you genuinely have a real probability of securing your historic achievement, if you're Boris Johnson, of getting Brexit done, if you can do it with certainty now as Prime Minister, why would you gamble on maybe able to do it slightly better or slightly harder with a majority that you would get in that election? It just seems to me nuts. No poker player would do that. They'd take the winnings they've got.
Jess, hand on heart, what do you think Jeremy Corbyn really wants the outcome of the next few weeks to be?
It's really difficult to say.
Do you think he'd quite like Brexit to happen next month?
Yes, I think that he probably... It's not that he would like Brexit to happen.
But given the range of
I think he desperately
possibilities.
wants to move on from Brexit, which is essentially what Boris Johnson wants as well. And that's when I spoke to Boris Johnson this week. That was essentially what he was saying. He was like, I just want this done.
Quite the name dropper, right?
I've literally spoken to him twice in 5 years, but one slightly more tense than the other. I think that he wants to get back onto the terrain he feels comfortable in, and where he's not conflicted, both personally, in his own personal view, but also his base is so very conflicted on the issue of Brexit, with the South being Remain, the North being Leave.
But Jeremy Corbyn thinks we can get back to the type of politics
talking about
we used
austerity and talking about the police and cuts to schools. To be honest, who could blame him? We all want to get back to actually talking about those things.
Agree on that.
Yeah.
You know, you can be a sort of hairy lefty living in Camden writing, you know, a blog and marching for a people's vote every weekend, and you can be, you know, a steel worker in your mid-50s in Teesside, and you actually pretty much agree on most elements of the Labour Party of Jeremy Corbyn's domestic agenda. You know, nationalisation of lots of staff, more spending on things, you know, you agree on that. So his party is riven down the middle
and there is a way
by
to
this
bring it
one
back
issue, and so you can see how he'd just love somebody to resolve it for him and
But
take
this is
it
one
away.
of the great questions of our age. Will it all come back together, or have we moved into a new era of politics? Because we're told we have moved into a new era of politics, culture politics.
Yes, I mean, whether people's political allegiances, which have been shaken off, those clothes can be put back on, is a question that we're going to have to answer. I think yes, actually. Funnily enough, I think it's much more so for Leave voters than for Remain voters. Funnily enough, I think that their identities are far more tribally one way or the other than I think that Remain voters, once gone, are harder to get back. Actually, so whether they can ever come back, but regime changes and different in the years to come. I think some of the old alliances where people in the countryside, regardless of Leave or Remain, are more likely to vote Tory, and people in the cities and towns are more likely to vote Labour will come back. Actually, I don't know that it's.
I think they may be under strain, both coalitions, but there's no question that if the first phase, remember it's only the first phase, of Brexit was done and we actually legally had left the European Union, that the pressure on that strain would dramatically be relieved. Now, it might remain and return over some other issue that we can't predict in 5 or 10 years. It might return over the nature of the final deal. But I think that for the purposes of the election that immediately follows that, most people will snap back to roughly where they were before. But if Brexit hasn't happened and the argument is still full pelt, then, you know, people could be going all over the shop.
But that's an argument for the Tory party that you've left being able to tack back to the centre ground more and revitalising the coalition. You might be sitting there with a pipe and slippers in years to come wishing you'd never left, and it'll be the party...
I promise you I will never wish I never left the Tory party. The only thing I wish is that I had left rather sooner. So that won't happen. But I understand the point, and clearly is what Boris Johnson intends is he, as soon as Brexit's done, he's going to try and run as the most one nation, easygoing, high spending, you know, pro public services, pro tackling climate change, pro, you know, looking after cuddly animals.
Tony Blair in a blonde wig.
Yeah, but even more so, because if anything, Tony Blair, you know, every now and then had to tack to the right in a socially conservative way, you know, on whether it was on crime or other things, where Boris will literally be full tilt because he's already locked in them through Brexit.
Priti Patel won't be there.
He will, no, well, he knows he's got a coalition, but you know, it will ultimately be about what message he's presenting. The problem is, and the reason why not just I, but people like me will not return so quickly, is the people who he will have filled the party with, both in terms of its membership base and in terms of these candidates who are being selected. And, you know, don't ignore this. A huge change is going to take place through candidate selection. Much more, we all thought it was going to be in the Labour Party, where Jeremy Corbyn was going to kick people like Jess out and replace them with...
But we have shed loads of democracy.
And actually,
so it's harder.
Yeah, they fought it all off. With us, 21, in one night, he dispatched 21 of the most symbolic, of the sort of moderate One Nation Liberal Conservatives. And plenty of others have decided that actually they've had it, they're going to stand down.
Yeah, I think that is a real worry about what does the face of Parliament look like post a general election. And I think you're right about Boris's inclination to be spendy, very, very liberal. But he will constantly run up against immigration problems. He will constantly run up against... He will become, a bit like David Cameron with the ERG, he will become a sort of, like a prisoner to his party.
And if we are looking at a general election into next year, you prefer in some of the sort of slightly warmer months...
For nothing more than practical reasons, I would prefer it to be warm.
And it needs to be done before Glastonbury.
I mean, that would be better.
Which brings me to my question. Is Jeremy Corbyn still the leader?
I think he will be, yeah. I think he will be. I can't see how that will change, especially when you don't know. What we're all living with at the moment is that in the morning you don't know what's going to happen by the evening. And if you don't know when there's going to be an election, it would be very, very dramatic for any of the political parties to currently start some sort of a leadership battle, because you could be running into, especially the Labour Party is very, big on the old democracy, so it takes quite a long time, and there's a lot of us.
So to those in number 10 who are worrying if we leave it long, Jeremy Corbyn won't still be there, and that's what they say.
Oh yes.
You can reassure them, he probably will.
I should imagine he wouldn't be there. There is a couple of things in a number of the opposition parties. I think the Lib Dems are the only ones sort of clear of it, where there will potentially be problems for those political leaders in around January time. So that the report of the EHRC and the Labour Party around the issue on anti-Semitism is due to come out around then, although these things never come out when you expect them to. And of course the Alex Salmond trial for the SNP. I think both are have potential difficulties for the leaders of those parties, and so that's the only reason why I could think that he might of his own volition, but I don't think that there is any appetite to change the leader, even though he may potentially do better in an election, because of this you're constantly living on a tightrope.
It's a tragedy, of course. I mean, Jess isn't going to agree with me, whatever she privately thinks, but it is an absolute bloody tragedy, because if the Labour Party could persuade Jeremy Corbyn to sort of shuffle off to Havana for a well-earned retirement, and if Jess or Angela Rayner or frankly anybody even halfway human became leader of the Labour Party, they would win a landslide, especially if Brexit had been done. If Brexit had been done, and so there wasn't this whole row between the Remainers and the Leavers in the Labour Party. And then Jeremy Corbyn was, given a nice carriage clock and
I think he'd prefer Havana to a carriage clock. I think
a Havana probably better than a carriage clock. Then Labour would be back. Jeremy Corbyn is like a one-man dam holding back literally almost everybody I know, almost everybody in my family, people, most of whom have voted Tory for most of the last 10 years. They voted Blair when Blair was leader. They're all dying to vote Labour, and they can't because of Jeremy Corbyn. And they all would, to a man and a woman, they all would, literally under almost anyone else.
Is he right, Jez?
And one thing that is really clear when you're out talking to people, certainly around London, but also in other bits of the country, lots of people feel politically homeless, and there is definitely a home for some of those people that currently they don't feel that there is, and I think that partially they would put that down to Jeremy Corbyn. But the reality of the situation is that Jeremy Corbyn has won twice, and in the last election, I don't mean he's won elections. I'm not doing a Richard Bergen and suggesting that we won the last election. We didn't, but he's won this election twice. And in the last election, he did do considerably better. Now, I don't think that he's not going to be necessarily in such a sweet spot position this time, because Boris Johnson is a better campaigner than Theresa May by anybody's imagination. But there is something about when his back is against the wall where Jeremy Corbyn somehow comes alive.
He might surprise people. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts on another busy day.